This is The Speaking Show. I'm David Newman, and you're tuned in to the #1 podcast for speakers, consultants, and experts who want to speak more profitably. Keynote domination. Dun, dun, dun. I am here with Eric Chester, CSP, CPAE. The problem with keynotes, Eric, in my humble opinion, and I don't do hardly any keynotes, and we'll talk about that later. Many people who are doing keynote speeches should not be doing keynote speeches, like keynote malpractice. What do you see out there, both as the founder and director of Keynote Camp and just as an NSA, very seasoned, experienced member? What are we doing wrong? How are we thinking about this wrong? What's wrong out there with the keynote landscape?
Well, I think, David, one of the biggest issues is a lot of people hit the stage as a keynote speaker, not even realizing what a keynote is, what the responsibility is, who their audience is. So it's kind of a haphazard, throw a bunch of stuff together and hope that the audience will be happy, give an ovation, and they can go out and do another gig. But they haven't really thought it through what their job is.
So a lot of people that I hear in the hallways and elsewhere, they say, I'm working on my keynote. I'm putting together the slides. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's like either the last step or maybe even an unnecessary step. Putting together the keynote, not about putting together the slides. How do we start thinking about this? So someone says, hey, time to refresh my keynote, time to refresh my business. Keynote from square zero. What are some of the preparatory thinking strategic steps that would get us started?
Imagine I have you over to my house, David, and I say, let's make some ice cream sundaes. Yeah, oh, great. That'd be fantastic. I said, terrific. Hey, let's put on some sprinkles and, I think some butterscotch chips would be nice and some whipped cream. And before long, I start pouring all that stuff on the counter and you look at me and go, well, wait a second. What's going on here? I said, well, I thought you wanted an ice cream sundae. Yeah, but don't we need a bowl and then maybe some ice cream? Oh, I see. Well, the scenario you just described is the same way. Somebody has a clever story, some jokes that they think fit, or maybe, some kind of a talent. They sing a song, they play guitar, they can do a yo-yo tricks or whatever, and then they try to build their keynote around that. Instead of asking the fundamental question, who should I be in front of? I would ask anybody who's listening to this who is a keynoter or wants to be a keynoter to ask yourself a question. If you closed your eyes and said, okay, I'm in front of my dream audience. This is exactly my audience right here. I've got X amount of time, and they've brought me in to give a presentation. It's the dream setup for me. As I'm introduced and I take the stage, what does that introduction look like? I take the stage, I look out of the audience. I need to ask myself 4 questions before I even open my mouth. And those questions should have been answered long before I hit the stage. The questions are this: by the time I'm finished, what do I want that audience to think that they didn't think before I took the stage? What do I want them to feel that they haven't felt before I hit the stage? By the time I'm done, what should this audience know that they did not know before I took the stage? And last but not least, what are these people going to do by the time I'm done? Now, those are questions that really are the foundation of your business, not just your presentation. What am I going to do? What actionable result is going to happen as a result of me taking this stage? Now, it doesn't have to be that serious. Maybe your whole goal is you just want people to loosen up and have a good time. Okay, I get that. But if you're a keynote presenter, I think any decent keynoter has a goal in mind. By the time I'm done, this is what's going to happen. Think, know, feel, and do. And that's where it begins, David.
So, Eric, let's back up the truck for a quick second. The backup sound is like beep, 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 beep. What is a keynote? What is your definition of a keynote speech versus a presentation versus a main stage program versus a training session? When we say keynote, what do we really mean there?
Well, I think if you wanted to look back at where the term keynote came from, it was the keystone. It was the pinnacle. When you think about the way that an archway was built with block, and it was curved at the top, the stone at the very top was the keystone that held it together. And I think a keynote is pretty much the same concept. It is the presentation that launches people into a discussion. It launches them into a different mind frame, a different mindset. The keynote address, the first address, that's really where it came from. Well, it's extrapolated because we have people who give an after dinner keynote. The meeting has been there for 3 days and somebody's going to get an after dinner or a closing keynote. So we've kind of changed the definition of what that is, but it's delivering information in a certain period of time, and it's happening where the entire group is gathered together. It's not a keynote is delivered and half of the group is in, another ballroom and, that would be more of a breakout. The keynote is you have the entire audience. You're imparting something that is relevant to everybody in the room.
And is there a timing component, like usually 90 minutes or less, or what's the cutoff?
That's changed. I can't say a keynote is only 90 minutes because what if you heard somebody give a brilliant 92-minute keynote? There's two factors we'll talk about today, David, and one that have significantly changed the dynamics of a keynote over the past several years. And one of those is a TED Talk. I mean, before TED Talks, people thought, I got an hour. I got an hour to give a keynote presentation. Now, you might only get 30 minutes or 45 minutes, but an hour. And yeah, could you do a keynote in 90 minutes? But see, now that so many people are aware of what TED Talks are really all about, where you get a maximum of 18 minutes and not every TED speaker gets 18 minutes, 18 minutes. Now we go, whoa, what can you do in 18 minutes? Well, look at some of these brilliant TED Talks. People have done fantastic things. They have found water systems in countries where there was no water. They've cured their own Alzheimer's by eating certain kinds of foods. They've done things that are phenomenal. They tell their entire story and leave the audience with some actionable ideas. Bam, 18 minutes. So the attention span has dropped significantly. So does that mean a keynote has to be 18 minutes? No, but you got to be prepared to be able to deliver it in a shorter frame of time because many meeting planners now are not going to give you 60 minutes, maybe not even give you 30 minutes. So you might have to give a keynote address in 15 minutes. Are you up for the challenge?
I am not, but I'm glad you are. I'm glad you are. Hey, this interview is a real moneymaker. If you're serious about ramping up your reach and revenue as a speaker, trainer, or expert, book a confidential speaker strategy call with our team. The link is doitmarketing.com/call. It will be the most valuable 45 minutes you invest in your speaking-driven business. Speaking of value, let's get back to the show. I heard you say a couple years ago on the NSA main stage, throw everything in your keynote out and make every single piece audition to get back in. Remember this?
Yeah, I do. Very well.
It was wise words. How do we just sort of clean the slate no matter where we are? 1 year in the business, 21 years in the business, 51 years in the business. That takes a step of bravery, but then let's walk us through what does that audition process look like? What does it mean to be good enough, smart enough? What are the building blocks and the ingredients of our ice cream sundae that needs to pass that audition process?
Well, to become a more experienced speaker, your stories grow stories. They get longer, they get more in depth. They're funnier, they get better and better. But as that happens, those stories then grow legs. They become longer and longer. And because we love our own stories, examples, bits, anecdotes, whatever so much, we become attached to them because they get an audience response. It gives us the dopamine, the serotonin, whatever, to give us some kind of a charge. And so what we want to do is throw as much of that in there as we possibly can. And yet, what we're seeing from the marketplace is they want content delivered in a shorter and shorter way. But wait a second. This is the story about the time my bicycle was stolen when I was a kid and all the things that happened around that and my dad and the lessons that I learned, and it touches my heart, and it always gets a really nice ovation from the crowd. And all of a sudden now it used to be, I could tell it in 3 minutes, but then I added some dimension and some color and some character and it became 4 minutes. And then I found this way to do this and before long it's an 8-minute story. And so what? I can only tell one story or two stories? Instead of asking yourself the fundamental question, what do we want this audience to think, know, feel, and do before we begin to present? That's where the great keynoters start, right? Not just, well, I have this material and I'm here and I'm going to unleash this material in the audience. Is what does the audience really need from us? If we start with that question, then we look at all these children that we've birthed, all the stories and materials, and we go, which one of those make the most relevant points, analogies, and metaphors to deliver the content that we're there to deliver? And that's what I meant in that metaphor. It really wasn't a metaphor. I had 25 minutes to address over 5,000 people, and they liked my book and they liked the concept, and they said 25 minutes max. And I went, wow, I normally do 60 to 90. What am I going to do in 25 minutes? And instead of just, okay, I got to tell this story faster and this one faster and I got to work this one in, that's when I threw everything out and said, I'm going to make each piece of material audition its way in based upon the answer to those 4 questions.
For that particular audience.
For that audience. And I've done it every single presentation since. Rather than I'm going to start with a fundamental basic presentation. Hey, I know my opening, my body, and my close. And now, just what stories am I start with the fundamental question. What is the audience? What am I here for? Who are they? Who are these people? Why am I in front of them? And I look at it almost in a cynical way. If I were in the audience, would I want to listen to this guy? And that comes from, 12 years of doing high school assembly programs where you had kids who got out of 3rd period algebra and were sitting there going, hey, it's party time. How was I going to gather their attention and give them meaningful content so that they would want to hear what I had to say? So how relevant can you be? How relevant can you be to everyone in the audience? And some of us get so married to our stories, we think that by saying something, you got to have a dream, live your purpose, set goals, have a clear vision, and all that trite stuff. Wait a minute. How do we know the people in here don't already know all that? What are we going to add to the equation that they haven't heard before in a meaningful way?
So as you're doing this, right, as you are crafting this, making these decisions, customizing, tailoring, and personalizing, do you go just based on your audience research, your client conversations, or do you bring them in on this customization process at any point? Do you say, hey, I've got 3 different stories, story 1, story 2, story 3. Which one do you think your folks would want to hear? Or do you do more of this in private, having done the client conversation up front, but you're working in the lab now by yourself?
Well, I make it my business to know the audience, to know my content, and to connect the dots between the two. So I'm not going to let them choose the stories that I tell. They don't know those well enough. But as long as you mention research, what I do is provide actionable content. And I can give best practice examples from a story or from an industry based upon things that I've read or things that I've discovered. Where the real research comes in and what's been very effective to me is now I ask each audience, each planner, to allow me to talk to 4 or 5 people who are in the audience. And I really don't, oftentimes I'd rather do it by email because I don't want to schedule that many calls but I ask them, I interview people via email to 4 or 5 questions. And because my topic is on finding, developing, and keeping great people, I look for best practice ideas. Now, when I get in front of an audience, I'm not just talking about, hey, here's what Google did, or here's what Apple or Starbucks or Ritz-Carlton. They may have heard those examples, but when they find that there's somebody that's in the room that has found a solution to a problem that's driving them crazy, and I can make that individual or that story the star, now, wow, there's relevance. That's my research. That's how I bring the audience into my presentation.
So you will say, hey, I talked to Susie Cream Cheese right here. She's in the 4th row. What Susie discovered is, and you'll showcase someone in the audience.
Exactly. Some folks feel like they can't find great people, but Ralph in, Hartford, Connecticut found this amazing way to get more applicants, and especially the right kind of applicants. Here's what he did. See? So boom. Now, and oftentimes what happens is I get Ralph to send some photographs in, some stories. I can customize that. I may even have Ralph do a short little video piece on how we wound up doing it. I keep it short, but only if it's brilliant and what I call moments of gold. I'm not going to put anything trite in there. It's going to be shocking. So that's my particular way to customize what I do in a keynote. But again, not everybody is there to do a customized piece or that much in-depth research. Oftentimes a keynoter goes, look, here's what I do. This is my presentation. But if we look at it and go, it's one size fits all, the audiences are becoming so diverse, there is no such thing as a one size fits all audience anymore, David.
Right. No, absolutely. So some quick questions, because I've got just all these questions I'm channeling from our listeners. A really great keynote presentation. PowerPoint, no PowerPoint. Do we need slides?
I've seen amazing keynote presentations that use slides. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, what's a video worth? If your PowerPoint / keynote / Prezi presentation isn't phenomenal, it should not be on the main stage in a keynote presentation. God, I see people that get up in front of an audience. They don't know what they're going to say next. The slide are their notes. So they have to look at their own slide to give their notes. Then it's a slide with a gazillion words, charts, graphs we can't see, images that don't make any sense. It is an abomination and it shouldn't be used. However, if you need to tell a visual to help tell your story, to set up, this is what really happened, this is what's going on, now all of a sudden, absolutely, that's when it enhances the presentation as opposed to becomes a crutch for the speaker. And far too many people do that, do not know how to use their slides. Their slides are just a promotion about themselves. They have, a Joe Beefcake at the bottom and his website and his phone number and all this stuff. And the audience goes, wait a second, is this an infomercial about you? Or are you putting something up there that really resonates? My slides have 4 or 5 words maximum. It's the image that's on the slide that tells a story. And by the way, I never look at my own slides. Never. I never turn around and look at them. It is the show behind the tell. It's just happening. It's revealing as I'm talking. It is happening and it is enhancing the presentation as opposed to, if you'll stop now and look here, let me show you this chart. I don't do that. And I don't like keynoters that do that.
Super quick commercial break. Isn't this interview amazing? If you'd like to get more ideas on how to start or grow your speaking business fast, pop over to our free training at doitmarketing.com/webinar. So let's talk about stuffing 5 pounds of crap into a 2-pound bag. I think some of the keynotes that we see are way too content heavy, right? So out of your magic 4, people are focused on, they need to know this, and they need to know this, and they need to know this. And it's all about no, 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 KNOW. How many modules, how many chunks of content in a typical, let's say, 60-minute keynote speech? Should we be giving 20 ideas, 20 stories, 20 metaphors? Should we be giving 2? How do we budget that so that we're not cramming too much in and we're also not having too much fluff or too much white space?
Again, I'd love to say there's a hard and fast rule. I've seen presenters in an hour give 10 actionable ideas and points that were relevant. And I've seen people say, I'm going to give you 3 killer ideas, and there were no ideas there. So it really depends on what you're really saying and what direction. I don't think there is an absolute standard. No less than 3 points, no more than 5. I don't like those kinds of contingencies. I don't want to be boxed in because I think there's creative ways of doing it. The reality is you're going to get your best feedback from the people who hire you. If they're saying there's too much, if you're listening, if you're doing your follow-up work, you'll find out were there too many, where am I? I think that's what really helps us when we have peers who can sit down and go, you know what, you kind of lost us there. It's what I call and what we deliver in Keynote Camp, talking about the fall line. Now, I'm going to take just a second here and explain a fall line. When I went and watched freestyle skiers, the kinds that do flips and trips, and I went down, I watched a ski race. These freestyle skiers were coming down a mountain, and I asked one of the judges, how are they evaluated? And they said, not just based upon the number of tricks they do, but how close they can stay on a fall line, an imaginary fall line from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain. How straight that was. Because you might be able to do a sensational trick 30 yards away where you see a big bump. But what they wanted is people to stay in a more direct line. When they could stay in a more direct line, that keynote worked. So the reality is sometimes we got a story because it's so good, and yet we're there to talk about customer service, but this is a story that always kills, and it involves some kind of an illusion, and we're way off, and now we have to come back to the fall line. It had no relevance. So how tightly compacted can you be? If you have 10 points and it's tight, boom, 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 and it hits, fantastic. If you have 3, but one of those is way off in the bushes somewhere and it's not relevant, it's too many.
So I heard you use the magic word there. When we rehearse, when we practice, when our colleagues say, that really didn't work. Should we be practicing in front of our colleagues? How much do we rehearse and practice on our own? You don't want to be testing material out on a paying audience, correct?
Well, correct. To an extent, there are times where I've been in front of an audience and I've had a thought, an idea. I want to stay flexible enough that if I have an idea, I can take off on it. But I'm not going to go too far off the fall line, and I'm probably not going to, hey, I'm going to try this 8-minute story out. I'll throw out a taste. Boom, how does it work? I record each presentation, I go back, I listen, did it work? What could I have done? And from there, I build that story or that point out and find out, was that relevant enough? Do people remember that? If they're coming in going, hey, that thing you said about the fall line, wow, could you go more into that? Well, it takes more development to make that work, right? So, as far as rehearsing, I always think however people learn and how they remember. For you, it may be rehearsing in front of a mirror. Other people, that freaks them out. It's a little too creepy. They don't want to, well, I'll practice in front of my dog. I'll practice in front of peers. Every time you get a chance to get in front of a group or at least go through your material, the better. And the best presenters are those that know their material so well, but they come across to an audience like it may be the first time they've ever said it. So it doesn't seem so every word is canned.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So we have our keynote marching orders. Any final thoughts, closing ideas, tips to leave us with?
I think a lot of speakers spend a lot of time on an opening and a body and do not know how to close their presentation. They get to the close and it's just kind of weak as well. Well, it's been great being here today. I hope you guys drive safe on the way home. Make sure to, tip your waitress and, good night, folks. And it's very weak. And I think the audience really remembers impact. So there's got to be a call to action at the end of your presentation. Somehow, no matter what you're doing, even if it's an entertainment piece, there has to be something strong enough that brings people in, that makes them feel like I was in the right place at the right time. And I now have some clarity in terms of what I'm supposed to do with what I just learned, right? Not just some philosophical point out there. Be kind, people. What? How do I be kind? Give me something and then draw it together in a close so that I go, whoa, there was an ending here. Right? Far too many movies nowadays leave us confused because we're in the middle of it. The next thing you know, like Old Country for Old Men, what really happened? Next thing you see, the credits are running. Don't do that to your audience. Bring them to a closure, get them to go, wow. And it's not some far off story way off your fall line. It has to do with the points that you made that delivers a message. And at the end, people go, wow, I'm going to do that or not do that.
So cross the finish line.
Oh, I love that. Great metaphor. You bet. Cross the finish line.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Speaking Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on iTunes. Subscribe. Tell a friend. Go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thespeakingshow.com. See you next time.